What is going on, people? Ladies and gentlemen, SoyuzOne back here. Before I get too far, you can see in the video I click on both those facilities. You see both of them are level 2, and you can see how much of the tech tree is unlocked. This is really important due to the fact we are discovering in this video how we can get to the moon with very minimal rocketry, very minimal tech. All you have to have is the second vehicle assembly building and the second level launch pad. So those are not two things that are hard to get, which makes this video very important if you're in career mode and trying to get to the moon. So we see our build sequence here. It's fairly quick. Build doesn't take very long. So what's important in this video is we are getting to the moon with low tech, which is something that you really need to know in career mode, especially if you want to get a lot of science right off the bat. So you saw in the tech tree how much we unlocked. It was very little. I think we had one unlocked in either the third or fourth category. I think it was a third. So we had one thing unlocked that was 45 science, which is not that high, and it's only one of the things up there. So it does not take a lot of science to get any of these parts. I do not have a lot of parts to use from. Something else you'll notice is I have to use a lot of these little slabs, which does affect the craft whenever we launch it. If you guys haven't figured out yet, the more parts you have, the more stuff will flex. You can see I'm going through there and changing the rigid attachment to on, which kind of auto struts everything together. It makes it a lot stiffer. And same vessel interaction. So basically, same vessel interaction makes sure that parts that are considered to be on the same craft do not clip through each other. So that'll really help with keeping the craft less flexible in the air. It'll keep us stiffer and it'll let us turn better without the craft flexing, which you'll see is still a problem, but it's not as bad as it could have been. So another thing to look at is the funding for the craft is also not very high at all. In the end, it's under 40,000, which is very cheap, especially doing projects to the moon and getting the amount of science you get from the moon. So that's very important. Another thing to know also is our tracking base is still only level 1, so you have no patched conics. Now, if you don't know what that means yet, patched conics is basically whenever you're in space and you're looking at your craft through the tracking station, you can add maneuvers. You can see whenever you're going to intersect the orbit of another planet, another moon, which is very important since we are going to the moon and we will not have that. However, it is very easy to get that anyways. So you can see we launch our craft off. We actually had really good thrust. You could probably do it with less boosters and still be okay, but we have plenty of boost. Another thing you might have noticed in the build sequence is out of the 6 thrusters on the bottom that we have there, 3 of them are higher thrust, no gimbal. And then the other 3 that are smaller have less thrust, but they actually gimbal and let us turn a little bit. You can see how the craft kind of wobbles there. Not a good thing. Preferably, the craft should not do that. Yeah, that's not excellent. But we were able to gimbal a little bit with those engines, kind of correct ourselves, and those wings on the back keep us pointed forward through the atmosphere, which, as you can see in the top, we're kind of running out of atmosphere, but now the gimbal on those engines should do all the work. So we can see our apoapsis in the tracking station, which is if we stop burning fuel right at this moment, that's about how high we would go. So we can see all that. We have no problem leveling out in the nav ball at the bottom. We just want to shoot flat parallel because we only need to get past 70,000 to be considered in space. But we went a little high. It's no problem. We're going to end up burning anyway, so honestly all the delta V almost adds up. So we get near that apoapsis, we continue burning a little bit. Yeah, we just want to get that leveled out, get a nice circular orbit, and then we move into the next very interesting way that we can get to the moon without having any patch conics or any upgraded tracking station. So one little trick that I've learned, I've spent quite a while in the game. I know my way around, and also I watch like people that actually know what they're doing, like Matt Lone or Scott Manley or insert basically anyone else but me that's played the game. If you get to the point where you're looking ahead, like where the craft is pointing now is the direction we're traveling, and you look over the horizon and you see the moon, and you start burning prograde right when you see the moon, then whenever you intersect the moon's orbit, you will be almost perfectly right where you need to be. So we doesn't even require patch conics or anything. So you'll notice that whenever our orbit gets about on the same orbit path as the moon, there will be just nothing. It'll just look like the orbit doesn't change, and that's because we don't have any patch conics. But like I said, we don't need that. All you want to do is make sure that you don't get your orbit path right on that line, or you will collide with the moon just because of how close they are. So we get really close at 11,000. I would not go anywhere past that. And then we make sure that everything's pointed right, make sure we have enough electrical charge. Electrical charge is very important because no electrical charge means you can't reorient the craft, and we don't have anything to create electrical charge, and we also don't have anything to store it. So all we have to store it in is the capsule at the top. So we want to be like very mindful of that. So if you saw on the map, once we got out there, our orbit changed. It didn't tell us that until right there, so you got to be careful when you're time warping. Our orbit changed because we are now in the influence of the moon. So if you look up on the top map, or not on the top map, if you look up on the little indicators at the top, it'll give you your altitude to sea level of the moon. So to the right of that, it tells you if the altitude's increasing, decreasing. Once we started increasing, we knew we were past periaps, which is the closest part to the moon, so that makes sense. Once you go past the closest and you start getting farther, obviously that altitude will raise. So once we got to where the altitude was raising, we knew we were close to periaps. We went ahead and burned and circularized. I mean, you could just look in the tracking station. You didn't really need to know that. But for a future video, foreshadowing, possibly we might need to know something like that. So we will go ahead and circularize our orbit. We want to land somewhere a little sunny because we don't have any lights or any way to actually tell what we're landing on. And as you can see, the surface is not quite pancake flat, maybe like Grand Canyon flat. So start to burn, decrease our orbit. We want the left side of that orbital circle, which is no longer a circle because it goes into the moon. We want that to be somewhere somewhat flat. So it's not in a big crater. It's very hard to judge where you will land, especially if you don't know the exact relationship between how much thrust you have and how much your craft weighs, but we can go off a little experience and guess. This part isn't direly serious. You just don't want to land on the side of a hole or on a mountain. So we start getting closer, and what we want to do here is suicide burn. So a suicide burn is the most efficient way to burn your fuel when you're returning to the surface. This is exactly what SpaceX does whenever they have their bigger modules on their spacecraft's return. They save just enough fuel to where at the last second they can burn all of it or almost all of it and slow down. That increases efficiency a whole lot, and you can see that's almost what we were able to do. We had a lot more thrust than I originally thought, and we cut the engines a little before because we started slowing down too much, but we landed fine, and now you can see our spacecraft can't get up, but we were lucky enough to put a special little landing leg right on the ground. So make sure you would collect your science before you leave, or else the whole point of coming out here is kind of bust. And so we prop ourselves up on that little leg, shoot off, and then if you see on the nav ball in the bottom, we point 90 degrees to the pole and then flatten out. Now there's no atmosphere on the moon, so there's no need to shoot straight up and then curve over. That would just be a waste of fuel. So we go ahead and circularize our orbit once we get near periaps, and then that leads us to the final part, and I would argue one of the more important parts of this whole mission. Since we do not have patch conics, we can't add maneuver nodes, we can't figure out exactly where to burn for the most efficient amount of fuel. Now we do have a lot of fuel left over, and we actually ended up having more than I thought. Now electric charge, on the other hand, if you look in the top right, we are quite low on electric charge, so we want to be very mindful of that. That's something we want to be very mindful of throughout the entire mission. So what we're doing right here is we're getting to a point in the orbit of the moon where we can, once we accelerate out of that orbit, we will be canceling out the speed of the orbit of the moon around Earth. So it's kind of difficult to think of, but we're moving on that orbital path that the Mun is, at the speed of the Mun. So if we cancel that out, which you can see whenever we leave that orbit, because we're not going to go that far out, the patch conics just thinks that because it's not upgraded. So wait for it, and there you go. At that point, we leave. Now, we could have done a lot better. Our periapsis with Kerbin's orbit was a little higher than I thought, but we have absolutely plenty of fuel. So we go ahead and burn retrograde at the apoapsis. You can get it depends how hard you want to aero brake, which is the next important part of this whole thing. But you want to probably be somewhere between 35,000 and I would argue 55,000. If you're above 55,000, you can still be in the atmosphere, but you're not going to be slowing down enough to matter. Now, typically, you would just shed that bottom stage, but since we had so much fuel left, I thought I'd go ahead and burn retrograde just to speed up the process. We could have just totally let that stage go, and we would have been fine because the atmosphere would have slowed us down, and we would have eventually degraded back into an orbit that would crash down on Kerbin. So we go ahead and get rid of that stage. You can see all that nice plasma licking around all the edges. We check out our ablator shield. The ablators in this game are incredibly overpowered, but that's okay. That's actually preferred. So we keep coming down here. I went ahead and adjusted the settings for my parachute because I wanted that to go out at an appropriate time so we wouldn't just fall through the atmosphere forever. So we go ahead and activate our parachute stage. Eventually. There she goes. Slow down a little closer than I thought, but that's alright. We jettison off that heat shield. It's just a little bit less weight the parachute needs to carry, and we slowly go down. So guys, really appreciate you all watching the video. We'll see what we get to next time. Please comment, subscribe, and feel free to check out any of my other videos. Thanks guys.